Okay, ladies and gentlemen, luckily for you guys, we could finish up here with the Chapter 23 notes. I know yesterday I was on retreat, and today, currently, I am on my way to Staten Island for basketball. So I figured it would be best if we finished up with Section 3, and then Section 4, as I told you guys back on Monday, was pretty short. So we're still going to shoot for the test tomorrow. All right, so obviously you want to follow along here in the notes, and then hopefully you get all of them down, and then if not, obviously this will be on my website tonight. But the last thing that we were talking about on Friday of last week was this idea of Section 3, entitled Life in the Great Depression. We looked at how women were affected, African Americans as well. The farmers, too, are a group of people that are certainly affected by the Great Depression. Obviously, we had spoken about them in Section 1, but something that's going to happen, historically known as the Dust Bowl, all right, is going to bring about widespread crop failure due to the fact of a massive drought that really starts in the beginning of the 1930s. Now, when we're talking about a drought, we're talking about very little to no rainfall. And what happens is the topsoil that was used on the Great Plains, and remember, when we talked about the 1800s on the Great Plains, it's some of the most fertile soil in the world. But almost 100 years later, because of overuse, overproduction, that soil's not held together by many roots. And as a result of that, with no rain, the soil itself becomes dry. So, this is exactly what happened. It's known as the Dust Bowl. So, when referring to this time period, over 100 million acres are going to be affected by this. And you can see here from the map down here, we're talking about almost 150,000 square acres that affect New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and even parts of Nebraska up there. So certainly, we're talking about over, 250,000 people being affected by these widespread storms. Now, the Dust Bowl had, or these dust. The reason why it's called the Dust Bowl is because of these dust storms. Okay, this dry soil combined with drought, and also during the 1930s, it was kind of like a weather phenomenon here. We had massive amounts of winds. So during the 1934, 1935, many farmers referred to these dust storms as black blizzards. You couldn't see anything. Farmers were to leave their home to go out to their farm. They would tie themselves with a rope, tie themselves to their house so that they wouldn't be blown away. Many people are killed. Cows themselves died. So obviously, cows important for any farmer for food, etc. Some of the cows that died was due to suffocation. They had inhaled so much dust. So your textbook says many families, a third of them that were living here in the Great Plains, headed west towards California. Mostly people typically in Oklahoma, but to be honest, because of the Great Depression that was going on, things aren't much better. So the Dust Bowl refers to this really terrible time period, really between 1934 and 1937. But as you could see pictured here, all right, kind of looks like almost the end of the world is coming. All right, that's just all dust. All right, that's kind of going to be built up from that dry soil, as well as the massive amounts of wind. Certainly, from a cultural standpoint as well, the Great Depression brought out a number of writers, movies to kind of not only shed light on what was going on at the time, but also to kind of keep people somewhat distracted as to the severity of the financial system during this time. So, one of the most influential writers that come out of the 1930s is John Steinbeck, and his famous work, The Grapes of Wrath, which is something that you guys will most likely read at some point during your time at Kellenberg. I could almost guarantee it. One of the all-time greats. The Grapes of Wrath is a story that kind of looks at a family struggled through the Great Depression as farmers in the Midwest on the Great Plains, and kind of the trials and tribulations that they go through. Certainly the miseries of the Dust Bowl are highlighted in there. The work itself was so famous that um, in 1940, a year after the book was written, sorry, I'm just erasing these lines here. I'm trying to play around with this app a little bit more. After it was, after the book was written, a movie was made in 1940, um, which is a great work. So it's one of those American movies that's a must see. I'm sure many of you that are sitting there are definitely saying to yourself, you never saw it. So that's okay. I won't judge you for that. Um, Dorothea Lange, all right. You've probably seen many of her classic photos from the Dust Bowl. Some of them are in your textbook, but if you were to go home and Google some of the images, I have one on the next slide that I'll show that just kind of gets the real raw emotion of some of these people. What she did was she went through the Great Plains and into the inner cities and what have you, and took a number of different pictures to try to capture um, some of the emotion that many people, not only men and women, were going through, but also children as well. So certainly from a visual standpoint, it was very, very important. From a movie and radio aspect, the gangster films such as Public Enemy depicted kind of life as to what was going on in the 1920s with organized crime. But like I said earlier, many of the movies that were made during this time were meant to make people forget their problems. How many times in today's society, 21st century, that we go to the movies and, whether the story's real or not real, kind of, gets us out of our, or the mindset that we're in to try to, put yourselves in that movie. So, movies back then like King Kong, all right, the famous actress Shirley Temple for everything that she was in, became famous there in the beginning of the 1940s. But even the radio, all right, and that goes back to kind of a symbol of the Roaring Twenties, FDR and those fireside chats, all the different music, popular bands that would be broadcast over there, comedians, having half-hour spots on WNBC or any of those radio stations. So, soap operas started to become common there. So, the Great Depression affected Americans of this time in many ways. This section really talked about how it did affect people and how people tried to cope with it. So, if we take a look at the next slide. All right, here are some of the images there of, you could see there, King Kong wreaking havoc in New York City. All right, the cute and adorable Shirley Temple for everything that she was in. This is the Dorothea Lange pictures I was talking about. It's pictures, kind of still frames like that, as to what made her so famous. That's not actually Dorothea Lange, but just someone who was living in the Great Depression. And there's the Grapes of Wrath and a Public Enemy poster promoting the 1940 film. Section 4, as you guys have read already and answered questions on, talks about the legacy of the New Deal. Many of the programs that FDR is going to create, really starting in those first 100 days as president back in 1933, technically the election of 1932, but once he gets into office in 33, is going to have a lasting impact on the American economy as well as the American society, as we're going to see. One of the great things to come from FDR's New Deal is something that's actually passed in 1935, something that many of us are familiar with, or the idea of Social Security. Now, back in Section 2, we had talked about Francis Townsend talking about a pension for those people who were over the age of 60. Now, kind of building off that, and FDR kind of tweaking it in his own way, wanted to create something for those people who not just retired, but kind of just, towards the, for middle-aged people with family, a means of having extra money. Now, the Social Security Act had a number of different provisions, the first of which was known as old age insurance. All right. Now, this old age insurance idea would guarantee a pension to all those that were retired. Now, here was the catch. It would basically impose a payroll tax. And by definition, payroll tax, as you guys know, is a tax that removes money directly from workers' paychecks. Now, according to the act, FDR stated that employers would have to match contributions. All right, so if $2, say, was taken out of your paycheck for the month of September, the employer had to match that $2 that would go towards your pension. Now, many companies, employers, would argued against this for obvious reasons. Many of them said that it would take too much money out of the economy. It would be too expensive. But at the end of the day, this would go a long way to helping those who were certainly in need of funds towards the end of their, at the beginning of their retirement there. The Social Security Act also included what is known as the Aid to Dependent Children, or the ADC, to help those children whose fathers were deceased. Okay, so according to this, basically for anyone who had lost a father, helps the mom stay at home to take care of their children. This would give financial aid. It also gave financial aid to, according to the Social Security Act, to the disabled or temporarily unemployed. So there were a number of different ways in which FDR tried to help out those who struggled to make ends meet, for those who were too old to work. Now, at first, the Social Security Act excluded some categories of labor, as you guys read. It excluded agricultural work, all right, as well as domestic workers were not required to pay into the system. Many African Americans, migrant workers from Mexico, immigrants, poor rural whites did not benefit at all from the Social Security Act at the beginning, but at the end of the day, this provision of FDR, and this is, you would probably include in his New Deal. This is something that we still have today in 2015. Whether or not it will still be around by the time I'm 62, that's a debate for another day. But certainly, the Social Security Act for the average American, particularly the middle class, was extremely popular during this time. When we talk about the word reform, we're always talking about change, and certainly we know that FDR brought a lot of change himself through his terms as president. But even within his own cabinet, there were many people that would back many labor reforms, and a lot of reform came from his Secretary of Labor, Frances Perkins. Now, Frances Perkins is known as being the first woman to serve in a presidential cabinet. Your textbook gives a great quote, and I find this to be really spot on. She had said that the ideal of government should be through legislation and through cooperation between employers and workers to make every job the best that the human mind can devise as to physical conditions, human relations, and wages. Now, when you hear a quote like that, when you read it in your textbook, hopefully, hearing that, that's basically what FDR is trying to promote during those first few years in office. And she's going to be behind pushing through Congress something that's known as the National Labor Relations Act, or the Wagner Act. Now, basically, this act is going to guarantee workers the right to organize. We've talked about unions before in previous chapters. And it prohibited, though, unfair business practices, such as firing union members. So, that's going to go a long way to really helping businesses as well as the people who are employed by these major businesses. It also upheld the idea of something known as collective bargaining. Now, the way I always talk about collective bargaining, if any of you are big sports fans, when you hear about the NFL and the MLB and the collective bargaining plan, basically what collective bargaining is the right of a union to negotiate wages and the benefits for all of its members. So the Major League Players Association, when we're talking about the MLB, they get together whenever a contract's up to discuss certain wages. In the major leagues, part of the idea is that there's no salary cap. So, certain players can make a tremendous amount of money while others, if you're not good, like if you're on the Mets, may not make as much. So, and basically what the National Labor Relations Act did is it upheld this idea. Another one thing that's passed and pushed by Frances Perkins is going to be the Fair Labor Standards Act. All right, now some of these sound a little bit familiar, or similar, I should say. Um, this act basically passed in 1938. Um, was additional benefits for workers. All right, minimum wage is set at 25 cents an hour. That's almost a 25% increase. Maximum work week of 44 hours. All right, many times, especially during the time prior to the Great Depression, some people will be working 50 hours a week. Time and a half for overtime work, so that means if you're getting paid $10 an hour, if you work over 44 hours a week, all right, that's going to be time and a half. So if you're making $10 an hour after those 44 hours, 10, half of 10 is 5 equals 15. Miss K would be pretty proud of me with my math here. And also under the Fair Labor Standards Act, we're going to see the end of child labor, which, as we all know, we talked about the major impact of that. Child labor, children working in the workforce, that means that they're not in school, which is a major problem. And luckily for you, you guys are today. So at the end of the day, when we think about the New Deal and everything that FDR has done, and we've looked at it really through sections 2 and 4 here, what's the scorecard on the New Deal? Was it the exact thing that we needed during the 1930s, or can we kind of critique some of the things that FDR did? Now, Section 4 ends with some of the arguments against the New Deal. All right, a lot of people who certainly were from the other end of the spectrum here felt as though the government had way too much power during this time period here, and most rightfully so. It's not a terrible critique. We saw all the programs that FDR had tried to do and pass through, many of them which did go through Congress. We talked about how he tried to pack the courts, and many people felt as though that the federal government, in some ways, was looking to limit individual freedoms. Many economists felt as though that the United States should return to a laissez-faire approach. That's something that was introduced by good old Thomas Jefferson there to allow the economy to kind of figure its way out. More so laissez-faire to let alone FDR and the New Deal is really the polar opposite. All right, the government was so involved, and a lot of people felt as though that wasn't the right thing. Another critique to come out of the New Deal, especially towards the end of the 1930s, was this idea about the severe rise in national debt. FDR, through all of his programs, was he basically resorted to a policy of deficit spending. All right, it's a situation in which the government really spends more money than it was actually receiving, and the money that they're receiving essentially comes from taxes. So many people felt as though that during the Great Depression, that's the last thing that we needed was to continue to go into debt. But the big argument for all of FDR's New Deal provisions was this idea that he was going to get us out of the Great Depression. At the end of the day, all right, the New Deal doesn't get us out of the Great Depression. We already talked about back in Section 2 that it's going to be World War II, and really the World War II economy that gets us out of the Great Depression, and that's not until 1941. So we still got a little bit of ways to go here as far as FDR as president to help us. He certainly is the president that will get us out of the Great Depression, but it's not the New Deal that does it. But you can make a tremendous amount of arguments for the New Deal. All right, obviously, the federal government taking an active approach at the heels of Herbert Hoover. All right, his idea of raising taxes and just saying that we're going to triumph over poverty, it wasn't enough. FDR came into a situation where he was looking to make changes. He was looking to bring people closer together through his fireside chats, give them a sense of security, the idea that the government is doing a tremendous amount for them, and that's why, as we looked at the election of 1936, FDR almost wins unanimously. All right, winning 98% of the electoral votes is pretty impressive. Through the New Deal, one of the big things, all right, that we have to talk about was really trying to end the problem, or not end, but help fix unemployment, all right? Because of the CCC, the PWA, and all those things we talked about, millions of jobs will be created between 1933 and 1940. And many people would say that this is probably the most comforting thing of the New Deal. Many people would also argue, and certainly in right doing so, that it ends the banking crisis. After FDR shuts down the banks there, he begins to restore a sense of confidence amongst Americans to invest or to put their money in banks again, something that was not the case prior to him becoming president. Through Frances Perkins and as Secretary of Labor and all that she did, all right, we get improving working conditions here towards the latter half of FDR's first term in office there in 1935. So, obviously all those are great arguments for the New Deal. Building infrastructure, we talked about Lincoln Tunnels built during this time, preserving land, conservationism, going back to his fifth cousin's roots in TR and Teddy Roosevelt here. So all of these things that were arguments for the New Deal. The last thing that your textbook says is that it restores people's faith in government, and I think that's the biggest thing in moving forward, especially as we're going to head into an extremely stressful time known as World War II. That wasn't just a problem in Europe. It obviously becomes our problem, really beginning in 1939, but officially us entering the war in 1941. So that's something that we'll talk about in Chapter 24. So this is the end of Chapter 23. So you guys know we are going to have our test tomorrow. All right, it's actually a pretty easy test. You really just have to study a few things. For one, the New Deal. Okay, make sure you know the New Deal, all the things that are passed, whether it's an act, whether it's a program. If I were studying for a test, okay, I would anticipate maybe a big matching column of those. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of people that we were introduced to in this chapter, so not just Herbert Hoover and FDR who were president, but also some cabinet members, some authors, some actors, etc. On page 792 in your textbook, if I was in class today, we were going to do this for a do now. I'm not going to require you guys to do it for homework, but there's a cause and effect chart of the Great Depression. It has 5 causes and 5 effects. That might be a good thing to know, all right? Especially, those are all things that we've talked about over this entire chapter. It wasn't just section 1. So feel free to email me any questions. All right, I'll do my best to get back to you. Obviously, I'm not there to collect current events, so I'll collect them before your test tomorrow. Print out that sheet on the website, and hope all is well. So thanks for putting up with me today. I'll be back. No more retreats for me. So I'll be in class the rest of the trimester. So wish me luck today. Hopefully we win. If not, if I don't win, bad mood, Mr. Kirk tomorrow. Hopefully I'm in a good mood. All right, take care.